pause. Think fast. Hopefully, you realize this is probably a robbery or a drug deal. Or both. It could also be just a rando in a hoodie. Flooded with life decisions, we never have enough information or processing power. We fill in the blanks with mental shortcuts called biases and assumptions. An assumption is the information, usually from our memory, that we assume to be true. A bias is how we attend to useful information and ignore the useless. Luckily, we have a richer definition of what useful means. Oh wait, assumptions can cause biases to form, and biases can strengthen false assumptions. The accuracy of our assumption depends on how much we know, and we usually know less than we thought. You can't tell whether something is true just because it sounds like it could be true. You can't tell whether someone is guilty just by looking at them. You can't tell what card I'm holding. It is a Roblox gift card. Aha! Outsmarted once again! Biases and assumptions are our attempt to simplify the complex world. So why not simplify them with a simple tier list made of simple categories? Let's start with the one that everyone loves, confirmation bias. Confirmation bias leads someone to single out information that confirms their conclusion, while conveniently ignoring what disproves it. The conclusion can be anything: a belief, a value, an assumption, or why your neighbor is a Satanist. If someone dies after drinking water, water haters will use this to prove water is poisonous. But they are ignoring the existence of oxygen, which is clearly the cause of death here. Confirmation bias explains a great deal about human behavior, like how people can become radicalized and lean towards extreme ideas, how people can ignore evidence right in front of them, and why people say Game of Thrones only has 6 seasons. The framing of partial truth can be more misleading than an outright lie. When a politician says people support a stance, they are not technically lying when their family, friends, and secret families support it. What happens in confirmation bias is an idea feeding itself and becoming more deep-rooted. We let this happen to avoid a fate worse than death, being wrong. We don't want our self-esteem, beliefs, and understanding of the world to become unstable. These facets of human nature make confirmation bias the king of cognitive biases, easy S tier. The knowledge and skills we've gained are only useful when we generalize them, which means applying them in unfamiliar situations, like using your basketball skills to throw away trash from your bed. But too much generalization means overlooking variations and changes. Probably the only existing universal rule is that change is inevitable. We can see change everywhere, from the earth, our bodies, society, and the Pepsi logo. But still, we tend to avoid change, which is called the status quo bias. Some even try to deny change. But if they like the past that much, just invent time travel, idiots. The fear stems from the uncertainty, potential loss, and unfamiliarity that result from change. Maybe due to negativity bias, we tend to focus more on the negative consequences of change than the positive. Negativity bias is not all negative. It can warn us of new problems to work on and guide our change. But ultimately, it is our choice to change or not change. We could hold on to our beliefs, values, systems, and practices without giving them a second thought. Or we could challenge them through a critical lens and correct their flaws. By the way, culture and tradition should not be a get-out-of-jail-free card for discriminatory practices. I am of course talking about how I can't wear a bikini to a beach without getting weird stares. Besides generalization through time, we often overlook variations and individual differences. A consequence of overgeneralization is implicit bias, a tendency to assume all members of a social outgroup share particular traits. Sorry to break it to you, but racism is bad. A group might share similarities, but only to a limited extent. For example, not all TikTokers have an attention span of 1 second. Some have attention spans of up to 3 seconds. No two persons are the same, even twins have different life experiences. Also, the assumptions and biases in this video don't apply to every person. Still, it is human nature to find patterns in the world, from scientific principles to literary metaphors and analogies. To find patterns, we often use ourselves as the standard. The issue is each of our experiences has unique contexts. We don't realize how much a different context can completely change the situation. That is how PTSD can generalize trauma into everyday situations, and how someone compares a past event to an unrelated present situation. In other words, saying an edgy 14-year-old is basically Hitler. Generalization is more useful in some scenarios than others. While statements like war brings suffering are true in almost all cases, statements like money can't buy happiness depend more on the context and details. Because I'm pretty sure money can buy body pillows, examining the contexts and details is how we mitigate the flaws of generalization. We simplify the world beyond with just overgeneralization. Black and white thinking is a common assumption that classifies everything into two categories: good or bad, right or wrong, truth or lie, all or nothing. Reality is a spectrum between the extremes, but categories are convenient and simple. We often make binary distinctions between success and failure, with nothing in between. But this mindset can lead to low self-esteem and depression. Woohoo! I was 10 meters away from the peak of Mount Everest before I died from a meteor strike. Most things are not in the state of either one or the other, just like how black and white are not the only two colors. We also have colors like purple and razzmatazz. People don't have to be either fully with you or fully against you. Our need for identity and belonging leads us to chase labels and pick sides, without considering the nuances of each issue individually. A reason why some extremists blow stuff up is that they think they are the heroes punishing villains. Another reason is to let the real main character show off their powers. Anyway, I can only describe the black and white assumption as cringe. Another way we simplify the world is through the monocausal assumption. Human reasoning often works in terms of one cause, one effect. I'm hungry, so I eat. I'm lonely, so I go on YouTube. I'm down bad, so I go on Wikifeet. But the world works with a series of causes, each contributing a bit to multiple outcomes. We usually turn to the monocausal assumption when finding someone to blame. Even if multiple parties cause an undesirable outcome, we will often blame the person we dislike the most, as it is often hard to determine who contributed the most to the outcome anyway. That is why I blame a stomachache on Dr. John S. Pemberton for inventing Coca-Cola. The monocausal assumption seems easier to get out of, so it isn't that bad. Do you know that you and the people you like can make bad decisions? Emotions and assumptions sway our judgments of actions. Self-serving bias is the tendency to cut ourselves some slack, to take more credit than we should for our success and blame the world more than we should for our failure. If you want an example, play any multiplayer game in existence. We are just so desperate to protect our self-esteem. Meanwhile, we apply the fundamental attribution bias to others, overestimating the effect of situational factors on others' successes and personal factors on others' failures. It is easy to backseat another person's life, ignoring the context. Surely I can survive in the ice-cold sea after easily escaping the sinking Titanic. Fundamental attribution bias is just the bootleg version of self-serving bias. Then there is the in-group bias. We favor members in our group, namely people we know and like. This somehow includes complete strangers on the internet and celebrities. Dude, you don't know them and they don't know you. You don't have to defend Batman for his tax evasion allegations. I know this bias helps humans survive as groups, but all the favoritism and hypocrisy annoy me. The same can be said for self-serving bias, but I'm giving in-group bias a taste of double standards. Biases don't just filter information but also influence judgments, decisions, and reasoning. Action bias pushes people to favor action over inaction, even if the action could make things worse. This bias probably comes from the desire to change and control one's own fate. Not me though, I would procrastinate. Present bias describes people valuing immediate reward over a larger future reward because immediate rewards are more concrete and easier to comprehend. It explains why I procrastinate and don't work on the video. Relatable. Effort justification is when people give more value to the outcome the more efforts they put into achieving it, tricking themselves into thinking their efforts are rewarded. Basically copium. Apophenia is the tendency to find meaningful connections in unrelated things, like the secret tunnel connecting the North and South Poles. This bias represents our desire to find and comprehend the order and patterns in the world. Hindsight bias is when past events seem more predictable than they were, as we have knowledge that wasn't available in the past. This explains why those secret labs keep making the zombie virus when it ends the world every time. The framing effect is how our perception of information changes with how it is presented. Whether it's framed positively or negatively, it feels different to say that the cup is half empty of human blood and to say it is half full. The framing effect is not the only factor interfering with our ability to calculate and compare. Not every value can be accurately quantified with numbers. And that is why your favorite movie is rated so low. Definitely.
Oh, hi, Mark.
Things get worse when it comes to the abstract concept of probability. We only think we understand it, like a piece in a modern art museum. When we use a value to represent the probability of something happening, we are often guessing. That guess is influenced by unconscious biases and assumptions, like the availability bias, where we tend to emphasize easily recalled information. In the case of probability, we rate events that are recalled easily as more likely to happen. If you recently saw a documentary on aliens, you might suddenly think you are likely to be abducted by the US government. A dice throw having a 1 in 6 chance for each number is based on the assumption of fair dice. Besides that, a skilled person can roll the same number every time and ruin a game of Monopoly. Over-relying on assumptions and biases feeds us flawed information for our processing and corrupts the output. Unfortunately, we have to trust ourselves because we need that trust to initiate actions. The illusion of control is a cognitive bias describing our tendency to overrate our ability to control what happens. Impact bias describes us overrating our future emotions in terms of duration or intensity. Every emotion fades, including my embarrassment from thinking that girl smiled at me. Remember that time we regretted a past decision and thought another decision would surely lead to a better result? Or when we push unreasonable demands on others while thinking those demands were simple? We tend to romanticize or simplify imaginary or future events due to our limited information. Wait a minute, we have gone full circle. Assumptions and biases cause us to over-rely on other assumptions and biases. Emotions can also lead us to rely more on mental shortcuts. When we enter a state of fight or flight to respond to threats, like running from whichever version of Godzilla, we use the faster system one of thinking, relying more on assumptions and biases. Emotional investment in a bias or assumption will make us trust it more. This isn't only when we trust people we love more than we should and get murdered by a yandere. Negative emotions also create and strengthen biases and assumptions, as seen in mental disorders. People with social anxiety have an attention bias that keeps their focus on their every tiny action during social interactions, convincing themselves that other people are aware of the same thing. People with depression usually have a pessimism bias, overestimating the likelihood of negative events and underestimating the likelihood of positive events. How do we deal with our biases and correct our assumptions then? Knowing them is not enough. The G.I. Joe fallacy is the false assumption that knowing a cognitive bias is enough to counter it. Assumptions and biases come from limited information, so get more information. For example, talk to others to get their perspectives instead of assuming, not the people similar to you, because getting stuck in an echo chamber is a ticket to extremism. Find people with a different perspective to you, like that old dude yelling all day about something called Game Boy. You don't have to agree with their perspectives, but understand why they see things that way. Make an effort to examine information so you won't fall into mental shortcuts. Pay attention to the source of information. Don't believe everything from Facebook, Twitter, or the voices you hear at 3 AM. Compare new knowledge with the old to find the connections and conflicts between them. Thanks to this, I realized the world doesn't revolve around me, but the sun, and the sun revolves around me. This reflection process has the additional benefit of improving memorization of new information. If that sounds overwhelming, you can start with the first step of adjusting your mindset. Cultivate the openness to correct yourself, admit your limitations, and collect new information. The growth mindset is a concept proposed by psychologist Carol Dweck to describe the focus on learning and improvement. Adapting this mindset lets us more easily accept our thinking flaws and other failures. Like that time I died, develop a habit of reflecting on your past mistakes and the mental shortcuts you took. You can do this by Socratic questioning and mindfulness. Socratic questioning is a learning method of asking questions without an expected answer. Each question should lead to another question. Why do I go to a graveyard at night? Why do I want to dig graves? Why do I want to get my hands on a corpse? Why do I want to try necromancy? Why do I want to take top views? With this method, explore what assumptions you are making, what perspectives you are missing, and what flaws are in your logic. Mindfulness in the simplest terms is the awareness of the present moment. The awareness of thoughts enables us to spot our biases and assumptions more easily. Now I know my assumption that sugar helps me think was actually an excuse to eat Oreos for lunch. The awareness of emotions helps alert us when we are more likely to lean toward mental shortcuts. The methods I've mentioned all sound like a lot of work, right? That is why we rely on the easier path of assumptions and biases. We don't have the time or the ability to know every factor during everyday decisions. Making assumptions is our solution to limited information, and biases are the side effects of the mental shortcuts needed for survival. We can't ever know the full story or reality as a whole. Still, we shouldn't give up learning. Ignorance might be bliss, but so is dumping your whole bank account into gacha games. The most harmful types of ignorance are towards others, towards science, towards the context of the situation, and towards how to aim in an FPS game, partly due to the normalcy bias. Many people underestimated the threats of COVID despite seeing how the outbreak affected other places. Lies grow, plagues spread, war starts and empires fall. It all starts with a wrong assumption. I only covered the assumptions and biases that stood out to me the most, but more exist. Feel free to leave your favorite ones in the comments. I assume you will like and subscribe, so you will do it, right? See you in the next video where I deconstruct reality. I will actually do it.